These elderly individuals with declining faculties ought to cease their activities, the municipal representative exclaimed upon observing the senior gentleman mending bicycles behind the church. The elderly man offered no reply, merely proceeding to tighten the chain on a young person's bicycle. 3 days thereafter, Air Force One made an unforeseen arrival at the town's disused airfield. The individual in the dark blue attire stated, "We must locate the person who repaired a red bicycle in 1985. For what reason did the entire town rise in support upon discovering the truth about the elderly man? Walter Reed had been a constant presence in Harlan's Mill, Nebraska, for such an extended period that the majority of inhabitants could not recall his initial arrival. At 82 years of age, his slender physique moved with the deliberate exactitude of one who had mastered energy preservation. His hands, though misshapen by age, were remarkably unwavering when manipulating instruments. For more than 3 decades, he had resided in a diminutive chamber situated behind the old First Methodist Church, an edifice that had remained unoccupied since the congregation erected their new, contemporary edifice on the opposite side of town 5 years prior. Every day, irrespective of weather, Walter would establish his temporary bicycle mending station in the umbrage of the enormous oak tree that held sway in the church's rear grounds. His work surface was a straightforward sheet of plywood supported by 2 sawhorses, his implements arranged with meticulous care in an aged fishing gear container. A hand-decorated wooden placard, its lettering faded yet discernible, simply stated, "Complimentary bicycle repairs. If assistance is required, I am available." Walter never promoted his offerings, nor did he pursue acknowledgement. He merely appeared each morning at 8 o'clock, prepared to mend punctured tires, regulate brakes, or substitute damaged chains for any individual in need, especially young people and those unable to patronize the town's sole commercial bicycle establishment. He levied no charges, accepting only infrequent homemade baked goods or expressions of gratitude from appreciative children. "For what reason do you perform this service without charge?" individuals would sometimes inquire. Walter's response was invariably the same: every person requires a functional bicycle. Not every person possesses funds. The arrangement had persisted without incident until Harlan's Mill was awarded a federal grant for community improvement. Abruptly, the disused church grounds transformed into desirable property in the estimation of the town council. "We could convert that eyesore into something beneficial," proclaimed Marcus Dean, the newly chosen director of town planning, during a council session. A contemporary community hub would benefit all, not merely a small number of individuals having their bicycles mended by some unconventional elderly gentleman. The motion to redevelop the church grounds was approved without dissent. Marcus was tasked with managing the initiative, which included the duty of finding new locations for any existing occupants. The ensuing Monday, Marcus showed up at Walter's mending station accompanied by 2 employees from Public Works. Walter was bent over a young person's purple bicycle, meticulously setting the handlebars. "Mr. Reed," Marcus declared without introduction, "the town has sanctioned the redevelopment of this land. Your bicycle avocation is causing liability concerns for the town. That placard must be taken down today and your apparatus must be gone by Friday." Walter glanced upwards, narrowing his eyes slightly in the morning illumination. Several young people, who had been awaiting with their bicycles, observed with unease. These elderly individuals with declining faculties, subsisting on the charity of others, must yield to advancement, Marcus murmured to one of his staff, audibly enough for Walter to perceive. "He is becoming an eyesore himself." Walter remained silent. He simply completed the adjustment of the handlebars, tested them, and returned the bicycle to the expectant young girl. Then he rose unhurriedly, proceeded to his workbench, and commenced collecting his implements. By midday, information had circulated throughout Harlan's Mill. Several parents telephoned the municipal office to voice their objections but were informed that the determination was conclusive. The children were more forthright. A contingent of 10 gathered on the church's green space, bearing placards that read, "Preserve Mr. Walter's Bike Shop." However, their minor protest garnered scant notice beyond a few supportive honks from vehicles passing by. Walter himself presented no opposition. He merely shifted his operation nearer to the church wall, directly beneath the extensive boughs of the oak tree, rendering his presence less conspicuous from the thoroughfare. His placard now leaned against the tree's trunk rather than being supported by its own stand. 3 days subsequently, Walter was again occupied, mending the brakes on a diminutive red bicycle when an uncharacteristic sound captured his attention from above, the distinct reverberation of substantial jet engines. A sound infrequently perceived over this minor Midwestern locality intensified. Inhabitants emerged from commercial establishments and residences, shielding their eyes as they gazed at the approaching aircraft. As the enormous airplane descended towards the town's seldom utilized airstrip, a procession of dark sport utility vehicles bearing official license plates accelerated along Main Street, proceeding towards the church. The foremost vehicle halted at the church entrance, and several individuals in dark attire alighted, surveying the vicinity with intensity. One individual, attired in a notable navy blue suit, approached Walter directly. "Sir, we are seeking Walter Reed. Would that be yourself?" The unforeseen arrival of official vehicles created waves of bewilderment throughout Harlan's Mill. Inhabitants congregated at a respectful remove, exchanging hushed conjectures that spanned from matters of national safety to fiscal investigations. Marcus Dean navigated through the enlarging assembly, adjusting his necktie as he neared the location. "I am the director of town planning," he stated with self-importance to the closest individual in formal attire. "What is the nature of this?" The man scarcely looked at him before redirecting his gaze to Walter. "Sir, are you Walter Reed?" Walter acknowledged with a slow nod, placing his wrench aside. "That is I." By this time, four dark sport utility vehicles had established a secure boundary around the church premises. The individual in the navy blue attire identified himself as James Harper, National Security Advisor to the President. "Mr. Reed, an individual wishes to converse with you," Harper stated. "An individual who claims you mended his red bicycle during the summer of 1985. Walter's time-worn countenance remained impassive, though a subtle line creased his brow as he mentally sifted through countless repairs undertaken over many years. "Could be. Mended numerous bicycles over the passage of time. This specific bicycle was the property of a 9-year-old male. You substituted the chain, rectified the gears, and readjusted the handlebars. Furthermore, you affixed reflectors and a new bell." A glimmer of acknowledgement passed over Walter's features. "Bell shaped like a rocket. Red bicycle with white markings on the mudguards." Harper's formal demeanor softened somewhat. "That is the one. What is the nature of this?" Walter inquired, wiping his hands on a cloth already discolored by decades of lubricant. "Mr. Reed, we require your preparation for a visitor," Harper answered. "Air Force One has recently landed at your local airfield. The President of the United States desires to meet with you." A shared gasp emanated from the onlookers. Marcus Dean's complexion lost all color. "President? For what reason would the President?" Walter commenced, then paused as comprehension struck. "That young lad with the red bicycle." Harper acknowledged with a nod. President Michael Grant was that 9-year-old boy. He was residing with his grandmother for the summer period while his mother held 2 jobs in the city. That bicycle constituted his sole mode of transport and his most cherished possession. Within 20 minutes, the presidential convoy materialized on the horizon, advancing steadily towards the church. Secret Service personnel took up strategic positions around the perimeter as the crowd of townspeople burgeoned by the minute. When the convoy halted, President Michael Grant alighted from his limousine without formality. At 47, he presented an imposing figure, tall and athletic, with the self-assured demeanor of one accustomed to authority. Yet, as he drew near Walter, his presidential bearing yielded to something more intimate, almost childlike. "Mr. Reed," the president uttered, proffering his hand, "you likely do not recollect me, but I have never forgotten you." Walter stood more erect than he had in years, accepting the handshake with a robust grip that contradicted his age. "Mr. President, your bicycle possessed playing cards affixed with a clothespin to the spokes, creating a sound akin to a motorcycle." President Grant's countenance broke into a broad grin. "You do indeed recollect." The 2 men stood confronting one another, one the most influential leader globally, the other a modest bicycle mender united by an instance from decades prior. "When I was 9 years of age," the president commenced, speaking audibly enough for all assembled to perceive, "my bicycle malfunctioned. The chain completely severed, the gears were immovable, and the handlebars were contorted from a mishap. I was utterly disheartened. That bicycle represented everything to me, my autonomy, my delight, my sole genuine valuable possession. He pivoted to address the assembly, which now encompassed television cameras hastily deployed by news teams that had trailed the presidential convoy. I propelled the damaged bicycle for 3 miles until I located this establishment. I was weeping, for I knew my mother could not finance the repairs. And then I encountered Mr. Reed. The president motioned towards Walter. He inquired not why I was unaccompanied, nor the whereabouts of my parents, nor if I possessed the means to pay. He merely stated, "Permit me to examine what can be done." Walter fidgeted with unease under the scrutiny, yet the president proceeded. Mr. Reed did not merely mend my bicycle on that occasion, he imparted a fundamental lesson to me that those in poverty merit assistance without intrusive questioning, that benevolence requires no justification, that respect costs nothing to extend yet holds immeasurable significance for the recipient. From his suit pocket, President Grant took out a laminated photograph and presented it to Walter. The image depicted a slender 9-year-old boy seated with pride on a newly mended red bicycle. Behind him stood a considerably younger Walter Reed, his hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. Beside them was a woman with a weary appearance, the president's deceased mother, her expression a blend of thankfulness and pride. "My mother retained this photograph until her passing," the president remarked softly. On the reverse, she inscribed, "The sole individual who provided aid without inquiring about our need." Walter examined the photograph, then glanced up at the president. "I recall now. Your mother attempted to compensate me with a $5 note. It appeared to cause her distress to relinquish it. It constituted her food budget for the subsequent day," President Grant affirmed. "She later informed me she would have endured hunger to ensure my bicycle remained functional. It was my sole means of reaching the summer program that prevented me from loitering on the streets. Yet you declined to accept it." Walter acknowledged with a nod. No individual should be compelled to select between sustenance and maintaining their child's operational bicycle. President Grant pivoted to address the assembly once more. "I have accomplished numerous feats in my existence. I have enacted laws, brokered agreements, and rendered choices that influenced millions. Yet, I never forgot the lesson I assimilated right here from this gentleman, that genuine assistance seeks no recompense. That lesson molded my method towards public duty, towards policy formulation, and towards comprehending the true necessities of people." He laid his hand upon Walter's shoulder. "You did not merely mend my bicycle, Mr. Reed. You assisted in rectifying the trajectory of my life. And today, I have come to express my gratitude." The assembly had become entirely silent, numerous individuals wiping away tears. Even Marcus Dean stood motionless, his prior contempt supplanted by something akin to reverence. Walter, never at ease with attention, merely nodded and stated, "Simply performed what was necessary, sir." "That," responded the president with a grin, "is precisely the essence." President Grant had not concluded. With cameras documenting and the entire town observing, he directed his focus to the church grounds. "I am informed that plans exist to raise the structure," he declared, his voice resonating through the hushed assembly. "To substitute it with something novel." Marcus Dean advanced with apprehension. "Mr. President, we have obtained federal financial backing for a contemporary community hub. The blueprints have already received approval." "By whom?" the president inquired mildly. "The town council, sir. It was a decision made without dissent." President Grant acknowledged thoughtfully, his gaze shifting from the aged church to Walter's unpretentious mending station. "And what of Mr. Reed's bicycle mending service? Was that taken into account in your arrangements?" Marcus swallowed with visible effort. "We, determined it constituted an unapproved utilization of municipal land and posed potential liability concerns." "I comprehend." The president's tone stayed conversational, yet those acquainted with him perceived the firmness beneath the surface. "Allow me to articulate what I observe, Mr. Dean." Marcus Dean. "Sir." "Mr. Dean, I observe an individual who has altruistically served this locality for many years. I observe a location where young people discover assistance and optimism. I observe something uncommon in contemporary society, Authentic assistance without anticipation of recompense. The president motioned towards Walter's workbench. No individual ought to possess the authority to obliterate a place that cultivates hope, even if merely through the rotation of a small bicycle wheel. Pivoting to his aides, President Grant delivered an instruction that would permanently alter Harlan's Mill. I require a restructuring of our community development funding. In place of demolishing this church, we shall renovate it. One portion will continue as Mr. Reed's bicycle repair establishment, appropriately furnished and shielded from the elements. The remaining portion can serve as your community center. The assembly burst into acclamation. Youngsters leaped with joy, parents clapped, and elderly inhabitants nodded in agreement. In that instant, years of unexpressed gratitude for Walter's quiet contributions found an outlet. Only Marcus Dean appeared crestfallen. But sir, the blueprints, the building firms have already been chosen. In that case, they shall have abundant tasks in renovation rather than demolition. The president retorted with resolve. This site will serve as a testament that assistance and community are not merely abstract ideas. They are deeds. Deeds such as mending a child's bicycle when no other would. As information spread through the town, a noteworthy phenomenon started to unfold. Individuals who had remained quiet when Walter was being marginalized now emerged with narratives. He mended my daughter's bicycle the previous winter. A woman from the crowd called out. We were unable to purchase a new one for Christmas. He not only repaired it but also managed to find a purple basket to attach to the handlebars. She was so proud. An elderly gentleman came forward. When my joint inflammation became too severe for me to operate my three-wheeled vehicle, he adapted the handlebars so I could still reach the pharmacy on my own. He refused to accept any payment for it. Individually, residents recounted their encounters with Walter's unassuming benevolence. The collective impact of these accounts shifted the mood from mere festivity to something more profound, a community's acknowledgement of its own failure to appreciate what was truly important. During a hastily organized press conference in the churchyard, President Grant made two astonishing pronouncements. Firstly, the federal funding for Harlan's Mill would be increased twofold, with the condition that Walter Reed be involved in all stages of the church's renovation. Secondly, he disclosed information about Walter that even long-standing residents were unaware of. Mr. Reed served with honor in Korea. He received the Bronze Star for bravery after rescuing 3 injured comrades while under intense enemy attack. Like many of his era, he never discussed his service, nor did he seek acclaim. Walter stood uncomfortably beside the president. His gaze lowered as his military service was brought up. Over 60 years had passed since he last wore a uniform, and he had never leveraged his veteran status for personal gain or recognition. The disclosures proceeded. A presidential assistant circulated duplicates of a paper indicating that Walter had been covertly contributing the majority of his modest military pension to the nearby children's hospital for many years. Another document showed that he had declined numerous proposals to commercialize his bicycle mending techniques as a franchise, opting to maintain his assistance local and individualized. As these particulars came to light, Marcus Dean's political acumen at last manifested. He approached the microphones, declaring his immediate departure as head of town planning. I neglected to acknowledge the genuine contribution Mr. Reed makes to our locality, he conceded. My focus was on advancement at the detriment of conservation. That was erroneous. The president acknowledged Dean's resignation with a nod, then delivered a final declaration. Today, I am privileged to bestow upon Walter Reed the Presidential Citizens Medal, one of our nation's most esteemed civilian distinctions. It acknowledges Americans who have executed exceptional acts of service for their nation or fellow citizens. As he fastened the medal around Walter's neck, the elderly man finally spoke. Mr. President, this is not required. I merely wished to prevent children from having to propel their bicycles during the winter. The straightforwardness of his remark, the unadulterated, unembellished motive behind decades of assistance, moved many to shed tears. The president himself appeared momentarily bereft of words. The most poignant moment occurred unexpectedly. As the official proceedings drew to a close, a 7-year-old girl navigated through the crowd, holding a homemade baked good on a paper dish. She neared Walter with timidity. "My mother says I ought to present this to you," she uttered, proffering the somewhat misshapen treat. "She says I cannot compensate you with money for mending my bicycle yesterday, but benevolence ought to be nourished with something." Walter stooped, his knees protesting, yet his heart brimming, and took the baked good with the gravity of accepting a formal state present. "Thank you, young lady. This cupcake is still warm, just like children's hearts when they ride their bikes." The girl beamed and hurried back to her mother, oblivious that her simple act had flawlessly encapsulated the core of the day's happenings. By evening, national news broadcasts were featuring the story, the bicycle repairman and the president. Social media platforms surged with the hashtag #BeMoreLikeWalter, as individuals recounted their own experiences with unrecognized champions in their localities. The president's press attaché announced that Air Force One would remain stationed overnight, as the president desired to allocate more time with Walter and the inhabitants of Harlan's Mill. That night, they partook in a meal at the town's sole dining establishment. The President of the United States and the bicycle mender who had unintentionally molded his perspective on the world, encircled by townspeople still absorbing the day's occurrences over slices of apple pie. President Grant leaned closer and inquired, "For what reason bicycles, Mr. Reed? Among all the potential avenues of service, why opt for bicycle mending?" Walter pondered the inquiry, his eating utensil halted in mid-motion. "Upon my return from Korea, I was internally shattered, unable to find tranquility. One day, I observed a young person weeping over a damaged bicycle chain. I repaired it with the items I possessed. The expression on his countenance when that chain engaged and the wheels commenced turning. He placed his fork down, his gaze distant with recollection. Something within me began to turn anew as well. I discovered I could rest that night without the nocturnal terrors. Consequently, I mended another bicycle the subsequent day, and the day after that. In due course, the recollections of conflict were supplanted by the recollections of smiling children. That is a form of recuperation unattainable from a container or a physician," President Grant acknowledged slowly. "So, throughout all these years, every bicycle you mended was also mending me." Walter concluded plainly, "I suppose we all require a sense of purpose. Mine merely happened to involve 2 wheels and a chain." As the dinner drew to a close, the president made a final, unscripted gesture. He presented Walter with a small wooden box. Inside was a key not symbolic but practical. "This unlocks a dedicated workshop space at the White House," President Grant explained. "Once a month, if you are willing, we would like you to come teach White House staff and Secret Service members how to repair bicycles. They will then offer free repairs to children in DC's underserved communities." For the first time that day, Walter's composure wavered slightly. His eyes glistened as he accepted the key. "It would be an honor, Mr. President." 6 months subsequent to the president's unforeseen arrival, Walter Reed's bicycle mending station had experienced a metamorphosis, yet retained its fundamental nature. A suitable covering now shielded his work area from weather, professionally inscribed with "The Quiet Repairman," established 1968. His implements, still arranged with military exactitude, now encompassed cutting-edge machinery, contributed by firms touched by his narrative. The aged church had been exquisitely renovated, its main hall partitioned into a contemporary communal gathering area and an enlarged workshop where Walter now instructed local youngsters in bicycle mending techniques. A compact museum section near the doorway featured photographs and historical items narrating the tale of the bicycle mender and the president, encompassing the renowned picture of young Michael with his red bicycle. Walter himself remained unaffected by notoriety or acclaim. Each morning, he showed up at 8 o'clock, prepared to assist any individual who entered. When young people came with damaged bicycles, his reply was invariably the same: "Permit me to examine what can be done." Once a month, he continued his journeys to Washington, D.C. to conduct his bicycle mending program at the White House. The endeavor had surpassed all projections, with comparable initiatives being established in 50 urban centers nationwide. Thousands of young people in less privileged areas now possessed functional bicycles, attributable to the widespread influence of Walter's precedent. On a brisk autumn afternoon, a young boy observed Walter mending a contorted bicycle wheel, captivated by the elderly man's skillful actions and concentration. "For what reason do you not establish a large mending enterprise?" the boy inquired. "You could mend more bicycles and accumulate considerable wealth." Walter's hands never ceased their motion as he pondered the inquiry. "Certain things do not require magnitude," he answered. "They merely require correctness." The boy's mother, overhearing the conversation, acknowledged with appreciation. Later, she clarified to her son, "Mr. Walter imparted a lesson to our entire town, and even the president, that significance is not gauged by dimension or acknowledgement. It is gauged by steadfastness and sincerity." As Walter finished the wheel repair and rotated it to verify his craftsmanship, a diminutive brass plaque reflected the sunlight. Recently affixed to the workshop wall, it bore inscriptions that encapsulated his life's guiding principle: "A wheel turning again can push an entire life forward." Beneath it, another plaque stated, "Added value isn't in the sign outside, it's in hands that never refuse to help." And finally, a third inscription completed the collection: "You might not remember his name, but if you ever had a childhood bicycle, you probably owe someone like him." Just one small act of kindness can change a terrible day, a life, and sometimes even the world.